Summer, 1943. Camp Crossville, Tennessee. The brown liquid bubbling inside the glass bottle held the German soldier's full attention. He had never seen anything like it before. After 2 exhausting years fighting in the deserts of North Africa, surviving on dry biscuits, thin soups, and bitter ersatz coffee, this sweet, effervescent drink called Coca-Cola seemed like an illusion made real. For 5 cents, the same price American children paid with their pocket money, he could buy what felt like a taste of another world. Across the network of American prison camps that summer, 371,683 German POWs would face a truth that shattered everything Nazi propaganda had told them about American weakness. They discovered a nation where ice cream was a standard dessert, where soda was part of everyday life, and where candy bars were so common that guards handed them out freely. These simple foods, sweets that most German children had never even tasted, would prove more effective at dismantling Nazi ideology than any formal re-education program. The arithmetic of abundance was written not in speeches or pamphlets, but in sugar, carbonation, and chocolate. America's effortless plenty revealed an industrial capacity so vast that German deprivation no longer looked like noble sacrifice, it looked like pointless suffering. What began as astonishment at American treats would soon evolve into deep psychological transformation. When the Desert Campaign ended and the Afrika Korps surrendered in Tunisia in May 1943, around 250,000 German and Italian soldiers were taken into Allied custody. These were hardened veterans of the Desert War, men who had driven the British to the gates of Egypt under Rommel's command. They expected brutality, starvation, and humiliation as prisoners. Nazi propaganda had warned them, Americans were cruel, decadent, and weak. But within hours of surrender, those expectations began to collapse. The first surprise came in the form of K-rations. American soldiers often grumbled about them, but to the captured Germans, they were a feast: crackers, processed cheese, candy, fruit bars, instant coffee, sugar tablets, and cigarettes. Men who had survived for months on a handful of stale bread now marveled at this abundance contained in a single box. Military records show that even in the processing camps in North Africa, the U.S. Army served pancakes with syrup, fresh eggs, and milk, foods long vanished from German rations. From the very beginning, the U.S. military fed its enemies better than their own armies had fed them. The full significance of this act wouldn't be understood until much later. One German officer would later tell the International Red Cross, "We expected to be starved as prisoners. Instead, the Americans fed us better than our own army ever did." That was the beginning of our education. The education continued aboard the Liberty ships that carried POWs across the Atlantic that same summer. Mass-produced at astonishing speed, one ship completed every 42 hours at peak production, these vessels transported up to 30,000 prisoners to the United States each month. Naval records reveal that POW rations aboard these ships were equal to or greater than those of the crew, about 3,500 calories per day, including fresh bread, meat, vegetables, and coffee sweetened with sugar and milk. The ship's refrigeration systems, standard on American vessels, kept food fresh for the entire 2-week crossing. And in one detail that seemed almost absurd to the prisoners, ice cream appeared on the menu. The log of the USS General M.B. Stewart from July 1943 records that ice cream was served to prisoners on July 4, made on board in 10-gallon batches using the ship's own ice cream machine. For men who hadn't seen ice cream since before the war, this frozen sweetness in the middle of the Atlantic felt like a miracle. When the ships docked at ports like Norfolk and Newport News, the prisoners stepped into an America that Nazi propaganda had declared a collapsing society. Yet what they saw was staggering. The Norfolk Naval Base alone, spanning over 4,300 acres, moved more cargo in a single day than some major German ports did in a week. Even the port shops told a story. On the shelves of the naval exchanges, German POWs saw endless rows of candy bars, Hershey, Mars, Nestle, all selling for 5 cents each, the same price charged to civilians across the nation. The lesson was becoming impossible to ignore. America wasn't starving. It was thriving, on sugar, on industry, on scale beyond imagination. The train journeys inland deepened that realization. Instead of the filthy cattle cars used for prisoner transport in Europe, German POWs rode in passenger coaches with dining cars serving full meals, fried chicken, vegetables, pie, and coffee. It wasn't special treatment. It was simply how Americans traveled. And when the prisoners finally reached the camps scattered across the United States, they encountered living conditions that exceeded every expectation, and even the requirements of the Geneva Convention. Camp Crossville, Tennessee, was typical: electric lights, running hot water, flush toilets, heated barracks. But the real shock came at the Camp Exchange, the PX store. According to U.S. Army Quartermaster records, PX stores stocked Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, RC Cola, and an array of candy bars and ice cream where refrigeration allowed. Cigarettes, tobacco, fresh fruit, and even beer with 3.2% alcohol were available. Prisoners earned 80 cents a day, later increased to $1, for their labor. With candy bars and Coca-Cola each costing 5 cents, a day's wage could buy 16 items. For men coming from a nation where such goods were nearly mythical, this was more than luxury, it was revelation. Coca-Cola, in particular, became a symbol of American industrial democracy. The Coca-Cola Company's wartime output reached astonishing heights, 5 billion bottles in 1943 alone. The U.S. military guaranteed every serviceman access to a 5-cent Coke, no matter where he was stationed, a logistical promise that demanded unmatched efficiency. To the German prisoners, the drink's omnipresence was bewildering. Every camp received regular deliveries. Everywhere they looked, factories, schools, gas stations, Americans drank Coke casually, even wastefully, tossing away half-empty bottles. The consistency of taste fascinated technically minded prisoners. A bottle from Maine tasted exactly the same as one from Texas. That level of standardization surpassed anything German industry had achieved. Company archives show that some camps, like Camp Hearn in Texas, consumed around 7,000 bottles each week during the summer of 1943. Every bottle was a quiet but powerful demonstration that America's strength lay not in ideology, but in production. Ice cream in American prison camps seemed almost mythical to German soldiers who hadn't tasted it since before the war. And yet, according to U.S. Army records, ice cream was a regular feature in facilities equipped with refrigeration during the hot summer months. To the American military, ice cream wasn't a luxury, it was essential for morale. It was considered so important, in fact, that specialized ice cream ships were built for the Pacific Fleet to ensure troops could enjoy frozen desserts even at sea. At Camp Shelby, Mississippi, the Independence Day celebration of July 4, 1943, included fresh ice cream made on site. German prisoners watched in disbelief as American soldiers used hand-cranked freezers packed with ice and salt to churn gallons of the creamy dessert. The ingredients, cream, sugar, flavorings, were combined and mixed with casual ease, as if these scarce wartime commodities were endless. The sight was almost incomprehensible. Ice, in July. Real cream. Pure sugar. All used for what the Germans saw as an entertainment food. It revealed priorities that their own nation, fighting desperately for survival, could no longer even imagine. By 1944, many camps had electric ice cream makers capable of producing multiple flavors: chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, butter pecan. The variety exceeded that of pre-war German parlors. Prisoners could purchase ice cream bars or sandwiches for 10 cents, or a cup of any flavor they desired. Army procurement logs from that year show that larger camps ordered between 50 and 100 gallons of ice cream every week during the summer. Quantities varied by season and location, but the indulgence was consistent. To men raised in a Europe of scarcity, this frozen luxury became the sweetest proof of American abundance. And then came sugar, the true revelation. In Germany, sugar was rationed to a bare minimum. Civilians were allowed just 280 grams per month, when available. But in American prison camps, sugar bowls sat on mess hall tables, filled and refilled without restriction. Quartermaster records from 1943 to 1945 show that most camps received 100-pound bags of refined sugar each week. Camp bakeries used it freely. Cakes, cookies, and pies appeared regularly on menus. Coffee, tea, cereals, and desserts were sweetened to taste, with no limits. One striking example from Camp Aliceville, Alabama, was recorded in August 1943. During a period of high humidity, several hundred pounds of sugar hardened in storage, becoming unusable. Instead of salvaging it, as any German kitchen would have done, the American staff simply discarded it and ordered replacements. The German prisoners assigned to the kitchen were horrified. To them, that much sugar was wealth. But for Americans, it was routine. Chocolate delivered a similar shock. Major manufacturers like Hershey, Mars, and Nestle continued massive production despite wartime restrictions. The U.S. military alone purchased nearly 380 million pounds of chocolate products during the war. Prison camp exchanges offered multiple brands. Standard Hershey bars, military D-ration bars, and assorted chocolate candies sold for between 5 and 10 cents. Prisoners soon realized that Americans had personal preferences when it came to candy. Some liked Hershey, others preferred Mars or Nestle. Choice itself was part of the culture. Even Red Cross parcels distributed monthly to the POWs contained chocolate bars and candy among other items: instant coffee, processed cheese, crackers, canned meat, cigarettes, and soap. For most prisoners, these extras were more generous than what their families back in Germany received as basic rations. Then came Thanksgiving. In November 1943, German POWs experienced their first true American holiday, and its overwhelming abundance. Army documentation confirms that every camp served the full traditional meal: roast turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes and gravy, sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, vegetables, pumpkin pie, coffee, and milk. Coordinating the delivery of turkey dinners to over 425,000 prisoners, alongside millions of American soldiers worldwide, demonstrated the immense organizational power of the United States. Even more striking was the message embedded in the meal itself: German prisoners received the same food as American troops. The equality of treatment clashed completely with Nazi ideology, which had built its power on hierarchy, privilege, and racial supremacy. And then came Christmas. Church groups, civic organizations, and ordinary American citizens sent gifts to the very men their sons and husbands were fighting against. The American Friends Service Committee alone distributed 50,000 Christmas packages to German POWs that year. Inside were homemade cookies, candies, toiletries, books, cigarettes, writing materials, and small games. Local communities often added their own kindness. In Tonkawa, Oklahoma, townspeople baked treats for the prisoners at Camp Tonkawa. In Hearne, Texas, church groups brought boxes of cookies and candy to the camp on Christmas Eve. For the prisoners, this generosity toward enemies was disarming. Nazi propaganda had portrayed Americans as greedy, decadent, and cruel. Yet here were civilians, some who had lost family in the war, showing compassion to captured soldiers. The lesson was as profound as it was unexpected: strength could exist alongside mercy. As 1944 began, that mercy turned into a form of practical cooperation. Labor shortages across the United States meant that tens of thousands of German POWs were assigned to work outside the camps, particularly in agriculture and food production. By the end of the year, roughly 100,000 prisoners were working in American fields, canneries, and processing plants, gaining first-hand exposure to the machinery of abundance. In Michigan, they picked cherries destined to become maraschino garnishes for ice cream sundaes, tiny, decorative luxuries made in quantities that astonished them. One orchard could produce more cherries for toppings than entire German regions harvested for consumption. At Del Monte canneries, they watched as factory inspectors rejected perfectly edible fruit for minor imperfections. Records from 1944 show that up to 15% of fruit was discarded for cosmetic reasons and used as animal feed. To the German mind, this was unthinkable: food, plentiful enough to waste. In Colorado and Nebraska, sugar beet processing plants revealed levels of agricultural mechanization far beyond anything in Germany. A single American farm could produce more sugar beets than entire districts back home. U.S. production from both cane and beets reached roughly 7 million tons annually, a figure that explained the casual abundance of sweets and desserts the prisoners had witnessed. Even schools offered lessons in prosperity. German POWs assigned to maintenance or farm work near American towns saw children receiving organized school lunches, hot meals with milk, vegetables, and protein. The milk program impressed them the most. Many schools provided fresh milk daily, delivered on time to thousands of classrooms. The logistics of such an operation, feeding millions of children every day, were almost beyond comprehension for men whose own armies struggled to supply soldiers at the front. In some schools, ice cream was even available for purchase. The idea that American children could buy frozen desserts at school while German children were going hungry struck the prisoners deeply. It was not just a difference in wealth, it was a different civilization. When German prisoners were assigned to civilian labor near small towns, they began to witness another element of America's food culture: its restaurants and diners. To many, even a simple roadside diner represented a wonder of abundance. Stainless steel counters lined with pies and pastries, sizzling griddles, and soda fountains dispensing ice-cold drinks, these were scenes of plenty that no German cafe of the 1940s could match. Some POWs worked in proximity to these establishments, delivering farm produce or assisting with maintenance. From the open windows, they saw American families eating hamburgers with thick slices of tomato, drinking milkshakes, and finishing with sundaes topped with whipped cream and cherries. The portions were enormous. One former prisoner, Heinz Richter, later recalled, "I saw a young boy leave half of his hamburger on the plate, and the waitress simply threw it away." In Germany, a child who left bread uneaten would have been punished. The prisoners could not understand how waste on such a scale was tolerated. But to Americans, it was a sign of freedom, the freedom not to be ruled by scarcity. As the war dragged on, U.S. food production not only kept pace but expanded. 1944 saw record outputs in nearly every category. American farms produced over 23 billion pounds of beef, 90 billion pounds of milk, and more than 70 billion eggs. By contrast, German agricultural output had fallen dramatically under Allied bombing, fuel shortages, and labor losses. For German POWs, the difference between the two economies could be seen in every meal, every factory visit, every discarded plate of food. Their letters home, monitored by censors but preserved in archives, revealed this shock and admiration. A letter from a prisoner in Texas read, "The Americans live in a world of superabundance. They eat meat every day, and even their desserts are rich with sugar and milk. Their poorest citizen eats better than our officers." Another, written from Camp Atterbury in Indiana, simply said, "Here, everything is sweet. Even the bread." By late 1944, the American approach to feeding both soldiers and prisoners had become a symbol of national identity. Food represented confidence, power, and moral legitimacy. It also became a quiet but effective tool of psychological re-education. In the early stages of captivity, many German prisoners held fiercely to Nazi ideology. They believed that the United States, despite its wealth, was culturally and morally inferior. But daily exposure to American abundance, and the fairness with which it was shared, began to erode that belief. The U.S. War Department's Prisoner of War branch noted in internal reports that demonstrations of American living standards have a greater influence upon prisoner morale than any formal propaganda effort. Simply put, the POWs were being converted not by words, but by breakfast. In 1945, as Germany collapsed, American officials prepared for the eventual repatriation of hundreds of thousands of prisoners. The question arose, what impact would these men have when they returned home? The Office of Strategic Services, OSS, conducted interviews with select POWs to gauge attitudes. The findings were striking. Most expressed admiration for American organization, work ethic, and the dignity afforded even to laborers. Food remained their central reference point for understanding America's strength. One report summarized, "For these men, America is not defined by politics or ideology, but by abundance, by the ability to produce, distribute, and enjoy without fear." In post-war Germany, those returning from American camps would carry this impression with them. They had lived within a system that was both disciplined and generous, efficient yet humane. Historians later argued that this experience contributed to the rapid post-war transformation of West Germany. Exposure to American values, especially fairness, productivity, and confidence in free enterprise, shaped the attitudes of many who would later rebuild their country. Even years after the war, former POWs recalled their astonishment at what they had seen. Ice cream, chocolate, coffee, and sugar had become symbols not merely of comfort, but of a civilization built on plenty rather than fear. One veteran, interviewed in 1972, put it simply. "We learned that democracy was not weak. It was strong enough to give." By the summer of 1945, the war was ending, and the camps began to empty. Train by train, thousands of German prisoners were transported to ports on the East Coast, where Liberty ships waited to carry them back across the Atlantic. For many, the departure was bittersweet. They were eager to see home again, but leaving America meant leaving behind a land that had challenged everything they thought they knew about the world. At Camp Crossville, Tennessee, where it had all begun, soldiers and guards lined up as buses filled with the departing men. Some exchanged handshakes. Others, who had worked side by side for months, embraced briefly before parting. A few prisoners left small gifts behind, carved wooden boxes, sketches, or handmade toys crafted during long evenings in the barracks. The Americans, for their part, offered them cigarettes, candy, and letters of farewell. One guard remembered watching a group of German officers board their transport. Before climbing the steps, one turned back and said in careful English, "You have taught us more than any book could." For historians, those words captured the essence of the POW experience in the United States. It was not indoctrination, it was observation. Through daily exposure to fairness, order, and abundance, the prisoners had seen democracy at work in its most practical form. Not a perfect system, but a functioning one. In the months that followed, the U.S. Army's Office of the Provost Marshal General compiled final reports on camp operations. The statistics were staggering. Over 425,000 Axis prisoners had been housed across 511 main camps and 900 branch camps in 46 states. They had harvested crops, repaired rail lines, processed food, and even built infrastructure still in use decades later. But beyond labor, they had carried something home that no intelligence agency could have planned, a living memory of American decency. In post-war interviews, many former POWs spoke not of battlefields or barracks, but of meals, the first ice cream they tasted in the summer heat, the sugar bowls that never emptied, the Thanksgiving turkey, the Christmas gifts from strangers. To them, food had become a language, a way America expressed power without cruelty. And that, perhaps more than any weapon, shaped the peace that followed. When they returned to Germany, these men entered a world of ruin. Cities lay in rubble, railroads broken, factories silent. But among them were those who had seen something different across the ocean, a vision of what a functioning democracy could look like. In memoirs and local histories written decades later, recurring images appear again and again: the taste of coffee, the abundance of milk, the generosity of ordinary Americans. One former prisoner from Camp Aliceville recalled that, after the war, when food aid from the United States arrived in the form of care packages, we knew it was real. We had seen it before. The irony was profound. Men who had once fought to destroy democracy became among its most persuasive witnesses. Historians now view the treatment of German POWs in America as one of the quiet triumphs of the Second World War, an experiment in justice and pragmatism that paid unexpected dividends in the peace that followed. No other nation fed its captives so well. None extended the same level of humanity to its enemies. And none reaped such moral authority from doing so. The same country that produced tanks, planes, and bombs also produced ice cream, chocolate, and Christmas gifts, and offered them to those who had sought to destroy it. As one U.S. Army report concluded in 1946, "We did not win them by force. We won them by example." In the end, the story of the German prisoners of war in America is more than a tale of captivity. It is a story of what power looks like when it is confident enough to be kind.